Beneath the veil of perfection, a tale of betrayal, desire, and tragedy in the heart of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a city of grand mosques, gleaming towers, and whispered secrets, a devastating tale of forbidden passion unfolded in the shadows of a seemingly perfect family. It began quietly, like a faint ember hidden in the ashes, but soon erupted into a wildfire of betrayal, heartbreak, and bloodshed. What started as a clandestine affair between a young Muslim wife and her father-in-law spiraled into a tragedy so shocking that it would shatter lives and leave the community reeling. The year was 2008. From the outside, Samira's life was enviable, a picture of harmony and success. At just 28 years old, she was a devoted wife, a loving mother to 2 young children, and a woman whose faith and modesty reflected the values of her community. Her home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood of Riyadh, was modest but comfortable, a testament to the life she and her husband, Faisal, had built together over nearly a decade. Faisal, a driven and respected businessman, was the family's anchor. Known for his charm and sharp mind, he was a constant presence in the city's bustling entrepreneurial circles. His ventures often took him across borders, and his business acumen earned him both admiration and financial success. For Samira and their children, he provided everything they could need: comfort, security, and a life free from material want. But behind the polished facade of their lives lay cracks invisible to the outside world. Samira's marriage, though rooted in tradition and mutual respect, had begun to lose its luster. Married at just 20, Samira entered a union arranged by her family, a match celebrated by both clans as ideal. In the early years, their bond was warm, marked by shared dreams and the excitement of building a life together. But as time wore on, something shifted. Faisal's dedication to his business became all-consuming. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, with him away on trips to neighboring countries, chasing deals and expanding his empire. Even when he was home, his mind was elsewhere, lost in contracts, meetings, and phone calls that seemed never-ending. The intimacy they once shared faded, replaced by routine conversations and the mechanical rhythm of daily life. For Samira, the void grew unbearable. Left to manage the household and raise their children alone, she found herself shouldering not only the burdens of motherhood but also the emotional weight of a marriage that felt increasingly hollow. The vibrant young woman who had once dreamed of a fulfilling partnership now felt like a ghost in her own life, silently yearning for connection, warmth, and understanding. But it wasn't Faisal who noticed the ache in Samira's heart. It was someone far closer than she could have ever imagined, her father-in-law, Khalid. Khalid, a man of imposing presence and quiet charisma, had always been a steady figure in their lives. Widowed for years, he often visited their home, sharing meals and stories, and doting on his grandchildren. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of wisdom and dignity, a man whose life was devoted to family and faith. But behind his stern exterior, Khalid harbored a darkness, a hunger he had kept buried for years. The turning point came during one of Faisal's prolonged absences. Khalid's visits grew more frequent, his concern for Samira's well-being seemingly genuine. At first, his attentions were subtle, a lingering glance, a comforting hand on her shoulder, words of solace when she confided her frustrations. But as weeks turned to months, those boundaries blurred. For Samira, starved of affection and desperate for companionship, Khalid's attention felt like a lifeline. What began as innocent conversations soon morphed into something far more dangerous. The stolen moments grew bolder, the glances longer, the touches more lingering. And before long, the line between right and wrong was crossed. Their affair, cloaked in secrecy, became a fire that consumed them both. Each stolen moment carried the thrill of the forbidden, the danger of discovery. But with that thrill came an ever-deepening web of lies and a growing sense of guilt that gnawed at Samira's conscience. She knew the path she was treading was perilous, yet the emotional void in her life left her powerless to turn back. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more engaging content. Don't forget to like the video if it resonated with you, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Your support helps us keep creating. But secrets have a way of coming to light, and this one was no exception. What Samira and Khalid shared in the shadows would soon ignite a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. A violent confrontation, a life lost, and a family left in ruins. What began as a desperate search for connection would end in unspeakable tragedy. Felt the weight of the growing tension between them. What began as innocent exchanges soon evolved into something far more complex, far more dangerous. Amir's words carried a warmth that filled the void in Samira's heart, and she found herself drawn to him in ways she couldn't fully understand, or accept. By mid-2010, their bond had deepened, and the line between familial affection and something forbidden was becoming increasingly blurred. Amir's visits to the house became more frequent. He would arrive under the guise of checking on his grandchildren or helping with household matters while Faisal was away on business. Yet, his true intentions were far from innocent. Samira, torn between her devotion to her family and the growing connection she felt with Amir, tried to rationalize their interactions. She told herself it was harmless, that Amir was simply offering the companionship she so desperately needed. But the guilt began to creep in, shadowing even the moments that brought her fleeting happiness. Their stolen moments became a dangerous routine. Amir would linger after family dinners, offering to help clean up or put the children to bed. He would find excuses to be alone with Samira, whether in the quiet of the kitchen or the dimly lit living room once the children were asleep. Their conversations grew more intimate, touching on Samira's deepest fears, her frustrations, and her unmet desires. Amir, ever the patient listener, used her vulnerability to deepen her reliance on him. One evening, after a particularly long day of managing the household, Samira sat on the balcony, gazing at the Riyadh skyline. The city lights twinkled like distant stars, but they brought her no comfort. Her thoughts were heavy with the contradictions of her life, her role as a wife and mother versus the growing feelings she couldn't suppress. Amir joined her, his footsteps soft but deliberate. "You look troubled," he said, his voice low and soothing. Samira didn't respond immediately. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and turmoil. "Sometimes I feel lost," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Amir placed a comforting hand on hers. "It's natural to feel that way when you carry so much on your shoulders. You've given so much to this family, Samira. You deserve to feel appreciated, to feel seen." His words pierced through her defenses, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe them. The touch of his hand lingered longer than it should have, and when their eyes met, the unspoken truth between them became undeniable. By late 2010, the boundaries they had once tried to maintain were all but gone. Their stolen moments became more frequent and more daring. Amir began to visit when no one else was around, ensuring that their time together wouldn't raise suspicion. Samira, consumed by the emotional void Faisal had left in her life, found herself unable to resist the comfort Amir offered. But the secrecy that once thrilled them soon became a source of constant anxiety. Samira lived in fear of discovery, knowing that the consequences of their actions would be devastating, not just for her marriage but for her children and the family's reputation. Amir, too, was acutely aware of the risk, but his desire for Samira outweighed his caution. The turning point came in early 2011. During one of Faisal's extended business trips, Amir spent an entire afternoon at the house under the pretense of helping with household repairs. The air between them was thick with tension, and as the hours passed, their restraint crumbled. It was the moment they had both feared and anticipated, a crossing of the final line. From that day on, their affair intensified. They became skilled at hiding their actions, creating elaborate excuses and carefully orchestrating their encounters. But the weight of their secret grew heavier with each passing day. Samira's once bright demeanor dimmed, her guilt manifesting in sleepless nights and distracted days. Amir, though outwardly composed, was equally tormented by the double life he was leading. Their secret couldn't remain hidden forever. Family members began to notice subtle changes, Samira's nervous energy, Amir's sudden attentiveness to her. Whispers of suspicion started to circulate, though no one dared voice them openly. The tension within the family grew palpable, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The breaking point came in late 2011. A confrontation, born of jealousy and suspicion, erupted in the family home, setting off a chain of events that would change their lives forever. In the chaos, the truth spilled out, and the consequences were immediate and devastating. A life was lost. Blood was spilled. And the family, once bound by tradition and faith, was left in ruins. What began as a desperate search for connection had spiraled into a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, a story of forbidden desire, betrayal, and the price of secrets too heavy to bear. Reasons to linger longer during family gatherings, making subtle gestures and comments that only Samira could understand. He began to push boundaries, meeting her in increasingly risky locations and disregarding the potential consequences. What had once been a cautious, hidden affair had turned into a dangerous game, one where the stakes were climbing with each passing day. By the spring of 2012, the cracks in their secret began to widen. Faisal's suspicions were no longer fleeting doubts, they had become an obsession. Unable to reconcile the growing distance in his marriage with his deep trust in Samira, he began to pay closer attention to her actions. He noticed her frequent absences from the house, her hurried phone calls, and the way she seemed to light up in Amir's presence. Faisal's younger sister, who had been the first to voice her concerns, continued to observe the interactions between Amir and Samira. During a family dinner, she caught a fleeting moment that confirmed her fears, a shared glance between the two that lingered just a second too long. She decided to confront Faisal again, this time more forcefully. "Something isn't right, Faisal," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've seen the way they look at each other. You need to open your eyes before it's too late." Faisal couldn't ignore the warning any longer. That evening, as he lay awake in bed beside Samira, he replayed every moment in his mind, the changes in her behavior, the rumors, the unease he felt whenever Amir was around. The doubts gnawed at him, eroding the trust that had once been the foundation of their marriage. Meanwhile, Samira was unraveling under the weight of her guilt and fear. The love she once thought she felt for Amir had become tainted by the reality of their situation. She couldn't escape the looming sense of dread, the knowledge that their secret could destroy not just her marriage, but her children's lives and the family's reputation. She tried to end the affair several times, but Amir's persistence and her own emotional vulnerability pulled her back each time. By the summer of 2012, the affair had become an open secret within the family, though no one dared to confront it directly. Faisal's growing suspicions led him to take drastic measures. During one of his business trips, he cut his travels short and returned home unannounced. What he found shattered any lingering doubts he may have had. Samira and Amir were alone in the house, their whispered conversation abruptly silenced by Faisal's unexpected arrival. The tension in the room was palpable, and though no words were exchanged, the truth was unmistakable. Faisal's eyes burned with betrayal as he stormed out of the house, leaving Samira trembling with fear. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Faisal, consumed by anger and heartbreak, demanded the truth. Samira, cornered and overwhelmed, broke down and confessed to the affair. Her words hung in the air like a death sentence, echoing in the silence that followed. The fallout was swift and devastating. Faisal, unable to contain his fury, confronted Amir in front of the family. The argument quickly escalated, and in a fit of rage, Faisal lashed out physically. The altercation turned violent, and before anyone could intervene, a fatal blow was struck. Amir lay lifeless on the floor, the consequences of their forbidden love culminating in a single moment of irreversible tragedy. The family was thrown into chaos. The police were called, and Faisal was arrested for manslaughter. Samira, racked with guilt and grief, became a pariah within her own community. The scandal spread like wildfire, tarnishing the family's reputation and leaving a once close-knit group irreparably fractured. Samira's children, too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, were left to grapple with the loss of their grandfather and the absence of their father. The home that had once been a sanctuary of love and stability was now a hollow shell, filled with the echoes of what had been lost. In the years that followed, Samira lived a life of quiet penance, haunted by the choices that led to that fateful day. She found solace in her faith, dedicating herself to prayer and seeking forgiveness for her sins. But no amount of repentance could undo the damage that had been done or bring back the lives that had been destroyed. The affair, born out of loneliness and longing, had spiraled into a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the destructive power of secrets and the fragile nature of trust. And though the years passed, the memory of that summer lingered like a shadow, a permanent stain on the family's history. What happened when the delicate web of lies finally snapped under the weight of betrayal? Faisal was a man who prided himself on control, but this was a storm he could neither contain nor predict. The days following his discovery were excruciating. Every interaction with Samira was tinged with bitterness, every glance at Amir fueled by a mix of rage and heartbreak. But Faisal played his role with calculated precision, concealing his knowledge while planning his next move. By early March 2014, Faisal's anger had reached a boiling point. He decided he needed concrete evidence, something undeniable to confront them both with. He enlisted the help of a close friend, someone outside the family who could act discreetly. Together, they began gathering evidence, tracking Samira's movements, monitoring her calls, and even placing a hidden camera in the house. What Faisal uncovered was even worse than he had imagined. The affair was not just physical but deeply emotional. The stolen moments, the whispered words of affection, they painted a picture of a connection that should never have existed. Faisal's grief turned to fury, and his need for retribution consumed him. One fateful evening in late March, Faisal decided it was time. He called a family meeting at his home under the guise of discussing financial matters. The entire family, including Amir and Samira, gathered in the living room. The air was heavy with unease, as if everyone could sense the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Faisal stood before them, his face a mask of calm that barely concealed the turmoil within. "I've called you all here because there's something that needs to be addressed," he began, his voice steady but cold. "Something that has been tearing this family apart from the inside." Samira's heart raced as she exchanged a quick glance with Amir. The weight of their guilt pressed down on them, but they said nothing. Faisal continued, pulling out a stack of printed messages and photographs, proof of the affair. "This," he said, holding the evidence aloft, "is what I've discovered. My wife, the mother of my children, and my own father, betraying me in the most unforgivable way." The room erupted into chaos. Gasps and murmurs filled the air as family members struggled to process the shocking revelation. Samira broke down in tears, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Amir tried to speak, but Faisal silenced him with a single glare. "You," Faisal spat, his voice shaking with rage as he pointed at Amir. "You were supposed to be the patriarch of this family, a man of honor and integrity. And you," he turned to Samira, his voice dropping to a pained whisper, "you were my partner, my love, the mother of my children. How could you do this to me? To us?" The confrontation spiraled out of control. Words were exchanged that could never be taken back, and the once close family was now fractured beyond repair. In a moment of blind fury, Faisal lunged at Amir, his pent-up rage finally breaking free. Family members rushed to intervene, but it was too late. The physical altercation ended with Amir collapsing to the ground, unconscious. In the panic that followed, someone called an ambulance. Amir was rushed to the hospital, but the damage had been done. The confrontation had exposed the affair to the entire family and left a trail of destruction in its wake. The aftermath was devastating. Amir survived, but his relationship with his family was irreparably damaged. He became a pariah, shunned by those who had once respected him. Samira, unable to face the judgment of her community and the brokenness of her marriage, left Riyadh with her children, seeking refuge in anonymity. As for Faisal, he was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. The betrayal had cost him not only his marriage but also his faith in the family he had worked so hard to build. He turned inward, finding solace in his faith and the support of those who remained loyal to him. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more engaging content. Don't forget to like the video if it resonated with you, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Your support helps us keep creating. Years later, the story of Samira and Amir's forbidden love would become a cautionary tale, whispered in hushed tones during family gatherings. It was a reminder of the devastating power of betrayal and the fragile nature of trust, a tragedy that would haunt the family for generations. Faisal sat motionless on the floor, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The adrenaline that had fueled his rage began to wane, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. The realization of what he had done sank in like a stone in his gut. His father's lifeless body lay before him, and Samira, trembling and tear-streaked, stood against the wall, paralyzed with fear. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, time seemed to stop as Faisal stared at his hands, now stained with blood, his father's blood. The man who had raised him, the man he once admired, had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable. And now, in a fit of uncontrollable fury, he had taken his life. Samira's voice broke the silence, shaky and barely audible. "Faisal, what have you done?" she whispered, her words trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. Faisal looked up at her, his eyes wild and haunted. "What have I done?" he echoed, his voice cracking. "What have you done, Samira? How could you, with him? My father?" Samira fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She tried to reach out to him, but he recoiled as if her touch would burn him. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I never meant for it to go this far. Please, Faisal, forgive me." Her words only reignited the fire in him. "Forgive you?" he roared, his voice echoing off the walls. "You destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, my trust. And now, look what you've made me do." Samira flinched at his words, her guilt weighing heavily on her. She glanced at Amir's lifeless form, the reality of the situation hitting her with full force. This was no longer a secret affair, it was a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. As the minutes ticked by, the weight of the moment pressed down on both of them. Faisal's anger began to give way to panic. The consequences of his actions loomed over him like a dark cloud. He had killed his own father, an act that would not only destroy him but also ruin his children's lives. "We have to do something," Samira said through her tears, her voice trembling with desperation. "We can't just leave him here." Faisal's eyes darted around the room, his mind racing. "What do you expect me to do, Samira? Call the police and tell them I killed my father because of you? Do you think they'll care why I did it?" Samira shook her head, her sobs growing louder. "Please, Faisal. Think of the children. Think of what this will do to them. We have to find a way out of this." For a moment, Faisal considered his options. His mind swirled with thoughts of escape, of covering up what had happened, but deep down, he knew there was no escaping the truth. This was a crime that could not be undone, a line that could never be uncrossed. The sound of approaching sirens suddenly pierced the silence. Unbeknownst to them, a neighbor had heard Samira's scream and called the authorities. Panic seized both of them as the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the windows. "It's over," Faisal muttered, his voice hollow. "There's no way out of this." The police burst through the door moments later, guns drawn and shouting commands. Faisal didn't resist as they handcuffed him and led him away, his expression vacant. Samira, too, was taken into custody, her sobs echoing through the house as she was escorted outside. The scene that awaited the authorities was one of horror, a man's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood, a knife discarded nearby, and a house steeped in betrayal and tragedy. The trial that followed captivated the nation, a sordid tale of forbidden love, betrayal, and murder that left no one unscathed. Faisal's once respected reputation was shattered as the details of the affair and the subsequent killing came to light. Samira's role in the affair made her a pariah, while Amir's name was forever tarnished. Faisal was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his father. In his testimony, he spoke of the unbearable pain of betrayal and the uncontrollable rage that had driven him to commit such a heinous act. Samira, though not charged with any crime, was left to face the judgment of her community. She moved away with her children, seeking to rebuild their lives far from the shadow of the tragedy. But the scars of that night remained with her, a constant reminder of the choices that had led to such devastation. As for the rest of the family, the bonds that once held them together were irreparably broken. The events of that fateful evening left a void that could never be filled, a dark chapter in their history that would haunt them for generations to come. Samira's fate unfolded like a slow-moving nightmare. Though she hadn't committed the murder herself, the revelation of her affair with Amir branded her as the root cause of the tragedy in the eyes of the community. Her reputation was destroyed, and the whispers of her betrayal echoed through every corner of the city. For a woman in her position, bound by the cultural and religious expectations of her role as a wife and mother, the consequences were devastating. In the courtroom, Samira faced relentless judgment. Her family disowned her, refusing to offer any support. Friends she had once trusted turned their backs, unwilling to associate with her. Her very presence became a reminder of the scandal that had upended not only her life but the lives of everyone connected to her. The court ruled that while Samira bore no legal responsibility for Amir's death, her actions had irreparably damaged her marriage, her family, and the community's moral fabric. In line with the harsh social norms she lived under, Samira was stripped of custody of her children. Her in-laws, already shattered by Amir's death, fought vehemently to ensure that she would never be a part of the children's lives again. Samira was left to fend for herself, ostracized and alone. With no financial support and no familial ties, she moved to a distant town, attempting to rebuild her life. But the weight of her choices and the tragedy they had triggered clung to her like a shadow. Every step she took felt like a reminder of what she had lost and the lives she had destroyed. Meanwhile, Faisal adjusted to life behind bars. The once proud businessman who had built a life of stability and success now lived in a small, cold cell. His days were long and monotonous, filled with the echoes of his own thoughts. Initially, Faisal struggled to come to terms with his actions. The image of his father's lifeless body haunted him, as did the memories of Samira's betrayal. But as the years passed, the fire of his anger began to dim. In its place grew a deep sadness, not just for what had been done to him but for what he had done in response. Letters from his children became his only solace. Though he was unable to see them, their words brought him a small measure of hope. They were being raised by his sister Aisha, who had stepped in to provide them with the love and care they needed. Faisal clung to the idea that one day, after serving his sentence, he might be able to reconnect with them and rebuild some semblance of a family. For Faisal and Samira's children, the events of March 6 became a defining moment in their lives. Though they were young at the time, the memory of that night lingered in their minds like a hazy dream. As they grew older, they learned the truth about what had happened to their parents. Aisha, their aunt, worked tirelessly to shield them from the harsh judgment of the community while also ensuring they understood the values their father had once stood for before his fall from grace. She encouraged them to pursue their education and to build lives free from the shadows of the past. Yet, the scars remained. The children often wondered if they could ever truly escape the legacy of betrayal and violence that had torn their family apart. Samira's new life was one of hardship and anonymity. She found work as a seamstress, earning just enough to survive. The vibrant, hopeful woman she had once been was now a shell of her former self. But despite the overwhelming weight of her guilt, Samira refused to let her story end in despair. She began to dedicate her time to helping other women in difficult situations. Volunteering at shelters and counseling centers, she used her own experience as a cautionary tale, warning others of the dangers of loneliness, temptation, and betrayal. In her quiet moments, she often thought of her children. Though she knew she would never be allowed to see them, she prayed for their happiness and success. She wrote letters to them that she never sent, pouring her heart onto the page in the hope that one day, they might understand her pain and regret. In 2029, after serving 15 years, Faisal was released from prison. The world he returned to was vastly different from the one he had left. His business had long since crumbled, and his name still carried the weight of his crime. But Faisal was determined to start over. His first priority was reconnecting with his children. Now teenagers, they approached their father with caution, unsure of how to reconcile the man they had imagined with the reality of his actions. It was a slow process, but over time, they began to rebuild their relationship, finding common ground in their shared desire to heal. Faisal also sought to make amends for his past. He became active in community programs aimed at mentoring young men, warning them of the dangers of letting anger and betrayal consume them. His story, though tragic, became a powerful lesson in the consequences of unchecked emotions and the importance of forgiveness. The story of Faisal, Samira, and Amir became a cautionary tale in their community, a reminder of the devastating consequences of betrayal, unchecked anger, and broken trust. For Samira, life remained a quiet struggle for redemption. For Faisal, it was a path of rebuilding and reflection. And for their children, it was a journey of finding their own way, free from the shadows of the past. In the end, their lives stood as a testament to the fragility of human relationships and the enduring need for forgiveness, understanding, and redemption. Though their story was marred by tragedy, it also held lessons that resonated far beyond their small community, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal and loss, there is always a chance to rebuild and move forward. Faced in her prison cell. The days stretched endlessly, each one a mirror of the last, offering her nothing but time to replay the moments that led to her downfall. Samira found herself immersed in a constant battle between regret and the faint hope of redemption. She had lost her children, her husband, her standing in society, and perhaps most painfully, her sense of self. In the quiet of her cell, Samira began writing, a journal of confessions, thoughts, and prayers. At first, the words came haltingly, but soon they flowed, pouring out the pain she had long buried. She wrote about her loneliness in her marriage, her misguided decisions, and the deep love she had once felt for Faisal, a love she realized she had failed to cherish. She hoped that one day her children might read her words and understand her humanity, even if they could never forgive her. For Faisal, the years in prison were equally isolating. The anger that had driven him on that fateful night gave way to a hollow emptiness. At first, he refused to speak of the crime, even to his cellmates or the prison chaplain. But as time passed, he found himself compelled to confront his actions. Faisal began attending group therapy sessions, where he listened to stories of other inmates who had acted out of passion, jealousy, or pain. In their shared confessions, he found a strange solace, realizing that while his crime was unforgivable, it was not incomprehensible. The chaplain encouraged him to write to his children, and though it took him months to summon the courage, he eventually began penning letters. In his letters, Faisal didn't shy away from the truth. He told his children about his love for them, his regrets, and the lessons he hoped they could learn from his mistakes. The letters were sent to Aisha, who chose to read them aloud to the children rather than share the physical copies. She wanted to shield them from the weight of their father's words until they were old enough to understand fully. By 2020, Faisal and Samira's children were teenagers, grappling with the complexities of their family's history. Raised by their aunt, they lived in a household where love and structure were present, but the absence of their parents loomed large. The older child, Lena, was fiercely protective of her younger brother, Adam. She had vague memories of her father's outbursts and her mother's tearful expressions but had never been told the full story until her 16th birthday. Aisha, seeing that Lena was mature enough, sat her down and revealed the truth about what had happened. The revelation shattered Lena's world. She felt an overwhelming mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. How could her parents have been so selfish? How could they have let their weaknesses destroy their family? But amid her anger, there was a flicker of empathy, especially for her father. She began to see his letters in a new light, understanding the pain behind his words. Adam, on the other hand, struggled more. Being younger, he had fewer memories of his parents, and the revelation left him feeling adrift. He lashed out at school and withdrew from his friends, unable to process the weight of his family's tragedy. In 2025, after serving her reduced sentence, Samira was released from prison. She emerged into a world that had moved on without her. Her once beautiful features were weathered by years of confinement, and her spirit was heavy with guilt. Samira knew that rebuilding her life would be nearly impossible, but she was determined to try. She reached out to Aisha, hoping for a chance to see her children. Aisha, though hesitant, arranged a meeting under strict conditions. The reunion was fraught with tension. Lena, now 20, met her mother with guarded eyes, while Adam refused to attend. Samira wept as she tried to explain herself, but Lena's words were cutting. "You destroyed us," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you even realize what you did to me? To Adam? To Dad?" Samira could only nod, her tears falling silently. "I know," she whispered. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. Even if you never forgive me, I need you to know that I love you both more than anything." 2 years later, in 2027, Faisal was also released. Unlike Samira, he had spent his time in prison preparing for the day he would step outside. He had plans, not for a grand life, but for a quiet one where he could focus on repairing what little remained of his relationships. Faisal's first act as a free man was to visit his sister. Aisha welcomed him cautiously, unsure of how the children would react. Lena, now 22 and pursuing her studies, greeted him with a mix of anger and relief. Adam, still struggling with his emotions, stayed in his room. Faisal's reunion with his children was slow and painful. He knew he could never erase the past, but he hoped to show them that he was a changed man. He attended counseling sessions with Adam and took Lena out for long walks, listening to her frustrations and fears. Over time, they began to see glimpses of the father they had once known, a man who, despite his flaws, deeply loved his children. By 2030, Faisal and Samira's lives had settled into a quiet rhythm. Though they lived separately, both worked tirelessly to rebuild their relationships with their children. Lena, now a social worker, often mediated between her parents, trying to bridge the gap left by years of resentment. Adam, still wary of both his parents, slowly began to open up, especially after starting therapy. He harbored a deep anger toward his mother but found solace in his father's willingness to face his mistakes head-on. For Faisal and Samira, life remained a series of small victories and setbacks. They would never be the family they once were, but they found comfort in the moments of connection they could salvage. Their story, though marred by tragedy, became a testament to the power of accountability, redemption, and the enduring complexity of love. Though their scars would never fully heal, they learned to live with them, finding hope in the possibility of a brighter future for their children, a future unburdened by the mistakes of the past. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more engaging content. Don't forget to like the video if it resonated with you, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Your support helps us keep creating.